Okay, so our next speaker is Professor, let me put on my, Min Zhou, who is a professor of sociology and Asian American studies and the Walter and Shirley Wang Endowed Chair in U.S.-China Relations and Communications. She's also director of the Asia Pacific Center at UCLA. She served as Tan Lark Sai Chair Professor, head of the Sociology Division, and director of the Chinese Heritage Center at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore from 2013 to 2016, and Chang Yang Scholar Chair Professor of Sociology at Sun Yat-sen University from 2009 to 2012. Her main research areas are in migration and development, migrant adaptation, integration, ethnic entrepreneurship, the new second generation, ethnic racial relations, diaspora studies, and the sociology of Asia and Asian America. She's published widely in these areas, and she's the co-author of the award-winning book, The Asian American Achievement Paradox, and also The Rise of the New Second Generation. Here she is.
Thank you very much. Now, let me get my slide. Where is it? No. Could somebody help me with my slide? I don't know where
I'm a
it
Mac
is.
person too, so this is always, where's yours? Yours is in here, there, and then let's make it big.
Yeah.
Big, big.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you again for organizing this wonderful conference, and I'm very happy to be here. And today I would like to share with you some of my research collaborating with Professor Jennifer Lee of UC Irvine. So the title is Hyper-Selectivity and the Remaking of Culture, and we are trying to understand Asian American achievement. So here is our book that was published in 2015. And this book, we are trying to get at the question of why the children of Chinese immigrants and Vietnamese refugees converge in higher education despite very different socioeconomic backgrounds. So today I just want to give you a brief overview of our book and then highlighting some of the key findings in this work. So Asian Americans is the fastest growing racial minority group in the US. In 1960, Asian Americans comprise less than 1% of the total population. By 2000, by now, it's made up nearly 6% of the population, and number more than 18 million. Still a small racial minority group, but Asian Americans, they are highly concentrated in certain areas, especially on the West Coast, as well as highly visible in the education arena, as well as in the labor market, the professional segment, professional sector of the labor market. And immigration is driving much of this demographic change, and nearly 3/4 of today's Asian American population is foreign-born, and 90% of the Asian Americans in the US are either foreign-born themselves or the children of immigrants. So their proportion of first 1.5 and second generation is a lot higher than the Latino immigrant than the Latino American population. So despite recency of immigration and diverse socioeconomic origin, Asian Americans seem to fare much better than other racial minority group in the American society, and hence the model minority image. And in fact, if you are looking at the hard data, right, just not long ago, the Pew Research Center released a study on the rise of Asian Americans based on a national survey of demographic trends, education, income, attitudes, and values. And the Pew Research report finds that Asian Americans attain the highest levels of education and household income of all racial groups, including non-Hispanic white. And they are more satisfied with their lives, their finances, and the direction of the country than other major racial groups. And they place greater values on marriage, parenthood, hard work, and career success. And here are some numbers of the bar chart of the education attainment of the adult generation. And you can see that Asian Americans attain higher level of education than all groups. And here is the household income, median household income figure. And so the Pew report, when it was released, it was quite controversial. Right, and especially in the Asian American community, the Asian Americans, activists and scholars, they dispute the thesis that was that lay underlying the Pew report. So, what was wrong? Why was it so controversial? And I would say that there was nothing wrong with the data. The Pew Research report is based on a randomly selected sample of national sample to survey, and also it's based on the 2010 U.S. Census. So there is nothing really wrong with the data. But what is problematic is the Pew report selectively highlighting certain hard data points about Asian Americans. For example, Asian Americans place high values on marriage, parenthood, hard work, and career success. And they the report explicitly or implicitly attributes their success to their right values, attitudes, and behavior. So that report is kind of reinforced the model minority stereotype that was framed in the 1960s at the height of the civil rights movement. So it's kind of reframing the culture of poverty thesis into a culture of success antithesis. So that was what was problematic and being debated. So how do we explain the Asian American achievement? And we know that the culture of success thesis is the antithesis of culture of poverty. It attributes a group's quote-unquote success to having the right value, right? So holds an essentialist view of culture as if there is something intrinsic in being Asian that promotes Asian American achievement. So Asian culture equals Confucianism. Now, Now note that there are Asian groups are very diverse, right? There are groups who had very little connection to Confucianism. So what is intrinsic about this Asian culture is actually a myth. So, for example, they attribute the Confucianist culture, the Confucian culture that places values on the family, on education, and also on parenting. So the phenomenon of the tiger mom or the wolf dad, for that matter, emphasize stern parenting with a clearly defined goals for success and an emphasis on outcome. So that's kind of the culture frame that promote academic success. And we probably all know about Amy Truss Battle Hum of the Tiger Mother, and it's a story, it's her own story about raising her children the strict Chinese way, attributing again success to Chinese culture, which is disciplining parenting, tough on kids, strict rules, and also focus on achievement, performance, and outcome. Well, there is some truth to that. However, how does that culture become actualized and how does that culture become effective on the kids? That's something in the midst. And also, Amy Tra and her husband, Rubenfeld, further published a book to further promote this intrinsic essentialist view of culture, saying that the success of a group is explained mainly by 3 cultural traits. So they highlight several groups, including Nigerians and other groups, so not just Asians, that possess these 3 cultural traits, and it is these 3 major cultural traits: a superiority complex, insecurity, like sense of urgency, and impulse control. Those traits that work to promote success. Now, the critique of culture in social sciences, the critique of the culture of success antithesis in social science is mainly from the structural explanation. So instead of focusing on culture, like basically it's criticized this cultural, essentialist cultural view. And it argued that groups that are individuals or groups that are successful is because of structural factors. And some of the structural factors for education is parental SES, family SES. So that's the classic social stratification model that heighten the effect of family SES, parental education, parental occupation status, and family income on children's educational attainment. And they also highlight the effect of race as a structural variable rather than a cultural variable, and look at how race and family structures interact to affect attainment. So it's totally abolished the cultural view. But the structural explanation also fails to account for some opposite effect of race. For example, if you run regression analysis, you will find being Asian have a positive effect on educational outcome. But being Mexican or being Puerto Rican or being African American have a significant negative effect on outcome. So what is in that race factor that have this opposite effect? Normally when you have the race effect, right? So race would have a positive or negative effect. But then being in different racial group have different effect. So that's what is puzzling. So why is it puzzling is because social scientists, when we do analysis, we always use race as it is given as a variable. So there is insufficient data in the quantitative data analysis or census. So there are data limitation in accounting for the effect of racism. So a lot of the times when we run models, racism is in the residual rather than its measure in the analysis. And then also in social science, there is also a reluctance to publicly acknowledge in a substantive discussion about the relationship between ethno-racial status and culture. So Jennifer and I, we try to argue that culture is a powerful influence on group status, but culture is not intrinsic to a group. Rather, we take an emerging approach on culture and look at how culture interact with structural circumstances. So we challenge the culture of success thesis, but not to discuss culture. We try to argue that an immigrant group's culture emerges and is continually reformed as a result of unique historical, legal, institutional, and social psychological processes in the host society. And culture has structural roots, and cultural pattern emerges from structural circumstances. In the Asian American case, in the structural circumstances of contemporary immigration and the processes of interaction. So when we talk about culture, it's not just the pattern that got bring in by the immigrants, but also how these patterns changes as immigrants adapt and trying to adapt and integrate into the host society. So here we use a concept of immigrant selectivity to try to get at how culture and structure interact. So immigrant selectivity refers to an immigrant group's average level of education that is higher than compatriots that they left behind at home. So they have been studied by a colleague of mine, Cynthia Feliciano, on immigrant selectivity. She's from UC Irvine also. So she found that except for Mexicans, most of the immigrant groups in the United States are positively selected. In other words, the group's socioeconomic status is higher than the general population that they left behind in their homeland. However, we see immigrant selectivity is too general a concept to have the kind of analytical rigor that we want to get at. So we fine-tune the immigration selectivity concept to have a hyper versus hypo-selectivity concept. So for groups that are hyper-selected, that means they not only have average level of education higher than the population they left behind, but the percentage of college graduates, so not just the average year, the percentage of college graduates in an immigrant group that is higher than compatriots in the homeland and also higher than natives in the host society. So if a group is hyper-selected, then their pattern of adaptation would be different than if a group is hypo-selected. Hypo-selected means on both counts, they are lower. So in the United States, one very significant hypo-selected group would be Mexican immigrants because their average level of education as well as the proportion of college graduates is a lot lower than Mexicans in Mexico and Americans in the general American population. So here is the figure of hyper-selectivity, high selectivity, and hypo-selectivity. So for the Chinese, it's very obvious Chinese are hyper-selected in terms of the college the proportion of college graduates in the homeland as well as in the host society. The blue bar is the target group. And then Vietnamese, they are high selected. They are like other immigrant groups. So their average level, despite the fact that they are refugees, their average level is much higher than the Vietnamese in Vietnam. However, they are still lower than the average level of education in the US population, right? They are highly selected in that count. But Mexicans, if you are looking at Mexicans, Mexican population is fairly well-educated compared to other developing countries. And then the immigrant group are lowly educated in this case. So there are, in our study, we noticed that there are notable effects of hyperselectivity, which could help us explain how Asian Americans are able to move ahead. So it's not just something innately to the group. It's also something in the host society and also the interaction. So we see that hyperselectivity equips an ethnic group with favorable starting point. So if you are thinking about an immigrant group, half of them already have a college degree, then the children or they themselves, they are already structurally adapted to the society because their level on arrival is already higher. So the children would have higher starting point. And it also enables the group to construct a particular cultural frame conducive to education. More importantly, a lot of groups have the cultural frame of success, right? But whether you can promote that cultural frame and to realize that cultural frame, it requires resources. So it also includes, hyperselectivity includes the group's ability to generate ethnic capital. Ethnic capital, we mean ethnic institutions and also ethnic practices to support and reinforce that cultural frame. And then with a group that have a lot of resources, then they have stronger social capital to allow the group to tap into symbolic capital, that is positive perception from the host society and positive stereotyping, which would be a cutting-edge sword, but it would promote educational achievement. And it leads to an achievement paradox. So there are several critical elements I want to highlight here that underpin Asian Americans' extraordinary educational achievement. One is there is a consistent constricting cultural frame of success that is kind of Asian, more Asian American. Like a lot of Asian American children, they experience this constricting cultural frame, despite the fact, regardless of your socioeconomic status. Like if you are growing up in Chinatown or Koreatown of working class families, you experience this cultural frame that is constructed by middle class immigrant families. And then also ethnic capital. In a hyper-selected group, you will see that there are ample cultural institutions and practices exist or established to promote education. And then there are symbolic capital, especially not just in the larger society because the group is positive, hyper-selected, then the positive image of the group influence how the teachers, how schools perceive the children. And it creates something like Jennifer coined the term, a stereotype promise, that is the positive perception from teachers that lead the teachers to give extra help to the students, and then the students perform as stereotyped. So a constricting frame of success, so a frame refers to an analytical tool by which people observe, interpret, and make sense of their social life. So the Asian success frame that is constructed within the Asian American community and also imposed by their surrounding, by their environment, is two things. One is a good education. A good education, not just meaning graduation rate, but a good education refer to straight A in school and degree from a prestigious society, and not just a bachelor's degree, but advanced degree. So a lot of Asians end up over-educate themselves. And then the other, the success frame among Asians is very constricting, so constricting that they gear, like the family or the community expect you to seek high status and high salary professional jobs in the Big Four. There are others too, but this Big Four is quite common: medicine, science, engineering, and law. And why the Big Four? Because this Big Four requires credential. So the parents would tell you that if you have the credential, if you do twice as good, then you can get there. And you can also, like if you don't like being employed, you can also establish your own business. So here are some interviews, script about this constricting frame, and you can see that this is a Chinese male. So he said that as far as I can remember, I've always felt like working hard and being smart and doing the best we could and have high expectations, like straight A's in high school and grade school for that matter. It was always something that was understood. So they even internalize this constricting frame. So here is Hui, a second generation Vietnamese male, and he shifted major from neurobiology to English. Now, I teach Asian American studies. I have students from science, pre-med, who take my class and decided that they want to switch major. I said, are you sure? What would your parents say? I don't want your parents to come kill me. So you can see that the kind of the response from the interview. He said, humanities is a hard major for Asians to swallow. They want you to be a doctor, pharmacist, or lawyer. My parents saw English as a hobby. It's not going to make you rich. My dad's friend would tell me that I destroy my dad's dream. So getting a good education is also a family honor too. And then when the parents are trying to promote children's education, it's like there are a lot of ethnic institutions, like after-school tutoring. They advertise, like, we can help you to realize your dream, not the children's dream of putting the children to good schools. And then ethnic capital is the ethnic institutions. So for the hyper-selected group, they have the resources to build institutions that carry on their practices from Asia. Like in Asia, there is this one entrance examination, college entrance examination that determines your fate for life, right? So there are a lot of after-school tutoring, academic tutoring stuff. So with the immigrants coming in, and they could promote education by promoting their business in educational institutions. So in the Asian communities, you see a lot of those tangible resources that support, not only send the signal to the parents, but also support the parents' constricting frame. So these institutions would create intangible resources like an ethnic social environment for success, as well as information that circulate both formally and informally about through ethnic channels, and that help immigrant parents, not just the middle-class parents. As a matter of fact, middle-class parents don't need that as much as working-class parents, especially parents who don't know English. Right? So these resources cut vertically across class lines to help working class co-ethnic as well, to override their social economic disadvantages. So we in Los Angeles, we'll see the Korean and Chinese yellow book, and their yellow book is thicker than the like AT&T yellow book. So they have bilingual, and there are a whole bunch of pages on after-school institutions that get advertised. And when they advertise the after-school institutions, they post images about the scholar, and also they post qualification of the teachers, that the teachers are from all these, like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, this good school. So here is some image about the advertisement. And again, they don't just promote academic, like doing tutoring. Like you can imagine kids going to these schools, not just weekend, but daily, right? So going to this tutoring to preview, so when the kids go into the classroom, they already know what is going to be taught. And then after that, they have review. And then exam, they have to cram the cram sessions as well. So that makes the Asian kids work twice as hard or 3 times as hard to generate the result. And then some of the after-school tutoring, they start very early. So there is this one. It's very interesting. In English, it's called Brainchild. It's a preschool, like 3 to 5-year-old kids, but in Chinese, it's modern math and English. So they try to start early. And there is a very prevailing slogan saying that don't let your kids lose in the starting line. So we want your kids win at the starting line. So when you enter the classroom, the kids are already winning. So that's the thing that they are trying to promote. And it's a business. So here is an interview excerpt from Hannah. And she said that summertime, besides going to summer school every single year, we also did tutoring classes to get ahead. If we're going to take geometry, then we are doing it in summertime. So they're doing it before. Or algebra in summertime. In the Asian community, I think everyone does tutoring. And then there is symbolic capital that we found too. So it's not just what's going on in the Asian family or Asian communities, but also what's going on in school, right? So the symbolic capital is a positive perception and positive stereotype by the non-Asians. So all Asians are good students, so that is a stereotype. And the stereotype is not only, it's not necessarily true, but it becomes true when it is favored by teachers and meet teachers' high expectations. So we find that this stereotype, we call it stereotype promise, is a form of symbolic capital. That is the promise of being viewed through the lens of a positive stereotype of one group, which leads one to perform in such a way that would inadvertently confirm the positive stereotype. So the consequences that it enhances performance, right? So we know that from social psychology, there has been study about stereotype threat. That is, if a group is facing the negative stereotype, then their performance would be negatively affected once the negative stereotype is involved. So here is an example of a stereotype promise. So Ophelia, second-generation Vietnamese female, she said, I wasn't an exceptional student. I was a straight C student, whereas my other siblings, they were quicker than I was, and they were straight A students. And then in school, what happened to her? We asked. Once she was placed in AP track, despite the fact when she transferred, despite the fact that she was a straight C student, right? But because the teacher believed that she could do it. So once she was placed into the AP track in high school, something just clicked, she said. And she began to excel in her class. I wanted to work hard and prove I was a good student. I think that the competition increases your desire to do better. And David, he also said that I think my teachers, view us positively just because the perception that Asians, Chinese typically do better in school than the Hispanics and the Caucasians and African Americans, right? So very quickly, the academic achievement becomes an Asian thing, even in school. So that gets enforced not only by your peers, but also by your teachers. And then you tend to internally reinforce that stereotype and try to meet that expectation as well. Now, we found that the paradox of achievement goals is among Asians is that the more successful are less likely to feel successful than the less successful. That means the more successful, they are not very sure about their success. And also they tend to show low concept and self-esteem. And then the less successful are more likely to feel successful than the more successful. So why is it? That is because they are using different frame of reference. They never, like when we interview the kids, they never look up to non-Hispanic white as their frame of reference. Rather, they look at the more highly achieving Asians as their frame of reference. So that puts a lot of pressure both on them and on their parents as well, and that it creates business for the after schools and things. So then the new stereotype that get created by this stereotype promise and positive stereotype is like, one is the tiger mom stereotype. It's suggesting that Asian American achievement is due to overbearing parents. And then there is this nerd stereotype that achievement is due to hard work. So Asian students are less likely to be viewed, and also when they come to the labor market, as self-starter, risk-taker, independent thinker. So that creates a bamboo ceiling that is specifically targeted Asian Americans when they come into the labor market. So they don't have problem getting jobs in the professional sector because they are overeducating themselves. But they do have problem when they are trying to move ahead in the labor market. And that bamboo ceiling operates like the glass ceiling that is affecting women and affecting minorities, except that the bamboo ceiling, you can see it, but not very clearly through the bamboo. And also bamboos are very resilient. You cannot break it. So in conclusion, we say culture matters, but not in the mythical way that is intrinsically Asian, and there is no such a thing as Asian culture. And culture of achievement that we experience in Asian America or in America has structural roots. And that structural roots is immigration hyper-selectivity. And it is constantly shaped by a Change America and immigrant and Asian immigration. So hyper-selectivity have consequences, and the consequences is it creates a favorable starting points for the children of Asian immigrants. It construct a very constricting cultural frame, and it has the group generate ethnic capital to support the structural frame. And then schools and mainstream societies have a positive perceptions of the groups, which works in certain way, but also it creates new stereotype that would negatively affect Asian Americans as they transition into adulthood. Okay, thank you.
As this assimilation continues for the Asian immigrants into the second, third, and fourth generation, did you study that at all and figure out how the Americanization of Asian Americans has changed kind of data that you find here in more recent immigrants?
Yes. Well, our research focused on the first 1.5 and second generation. As just now I said that the Asian American population, it's overwhelmingly first and second generation, right? So whether beyond the third generation, it remains an empirical question. But there is this trajectory of integration, as Lina just now alluded to. In the old days, Asians were negatively perceived because a lot of them coming into this country were laborers and low-skilled workers, and they were excluded from the working class movement and working class struggle. They were excluded from the union, so they kind of caught at the bottom, and they would not be able to move ahead. Even the second generation grew up in the 1930s and 1940s. The Chinese in particular, Japanese were already interned during the war, and the Chinese Americans were able to were allowed to integrate, right? And they went to universities, but then the larger societies still exclude them. So they end up, after a college degree, they end up going back to Chinatown to work in their parents' businesses. So that's the old days. Now today, the society becomes more open or more diverse, so to speak. So you could see that the upward mobility trajectory is possible for minorities to move ahead. However, once you move ahead, like hyper-selectivity have these negative consequences. Once you move ahead, you seem to have a positive image, but then that positive image would create new stereotype, and these new stereotype not only affect the immigrants or the second generation, but they also affect the later generation. So when you think about the prediction of Asian Americans going into politics, yes, they are the third generation, second generation, they are going into politics, and some of them are trying to break the bamboo ceiling, so to speak. But they can only do so in cities like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, or whatnot. But in some of the new destinations, when Asian Americans were a smaller number, regardless of your generation, they are still having problem. I have not studied that, but I have students who are adoptees, right, and also who are mixed race. Now, they also are impacted by the stereotype promise. However, they are the ones who are not as intrinsically tied to the ethnic community. So they are the ones who are still doing well, but they are not doing exceptionally well. So they are kind of the average. We see for Filipinos, right, the children of Filipino immigrants, Filipinos is a hyper-selected group, but they are also highly assimilated because of their English language, and a lot of Filipinos, they are nurses and physicians, right? So their children are doing quite well in school because of their middle-class background. However, on average, their children's educational attainment is significantly lower than the parents, all right? But is this downward assimilation or downward mobility? I don't think so, because they are still on average higher than the US average. And I would just say they are becoming average American. They are becoming American. But for the Asian, because of this success frame or this image, the Asians cannot become average. So the kids lament, the children of Asian Americans, they lament, they want to be like other Americans. How come I have to work twice as hard? How come I have to do so many different things, right? So they yearn for becoming American, but in the community and also pressure from the larger society, they cannot do that.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. And then
Thank you.